Hi folks, I'm Dan Peterson, and this is episode 9 of The Hole on the Corner, where we talk all things R.A. Lafferty and generally flood YouTube with R.A. Lafferty content because I'm just banging these videos out, getting them up there. It's a cache, it's a repository. The people who need it will hopefully find it and benefit from it, and we'll have a nice chat. Here's hoping. So we've been through all the novels of Lafferty, all the collected short fiction, and we're going to look at the uncollected short fiction. There's so much just sitting out there in these anthologies and magazines that's never been collected one way or the other. And I've covered a few of them in some past videos where they just came up in relation to some of the collections. So I'm not including those, and I am not including things published in the Centipede Press luxury editions because frankly those are not available to everyone. They're available to, if I'm being really cranky about it, a wealthy elite that I can no longer be a part of. I'm not going to be able to continue collecting these. At any rate, the point is it's not massively available. And also there's probably a few of these that are collected in a few older, like really obscure, small collections that I've never been able to get hold of and that are just not even available that I know. So I'm going to count these as uncollected. So let's bang in there. There's about 36 of these. Let's see if we can just like really get through them. And a lot of these I'm just not really going to remember, but a lot of them I do. So, you know, Bubbles When They Burst from 1971. Yep. From Galaxies, you know, kind of where Lafferty started in the 60s, but he still got something here in early 70s from them. Bubbles When They Burst. I didn't find it super memorable or impactful, but it was a cool idea, you know, kind of about worldviews and the bubble of your worldview bursting, but not within a particularly spectacular sort of event around that, I think, to me, as I remember, but I might like it better on a second go around. Yeah, so, but it says some cool stuff, but to me right now it's kind of minor. Now, and Walk Now Gently Through the Fire. This is not a Lafferty book. This is an anthology with multiple authors, but they named it after Lafferty's contribution to the anthology. And it was also collected by Andrew Greeley in this book, Sacred Visions. And I used to write a blog called The Ants of God Are Queer Fish, and that was based on this story, which starts out talking about, of all the species in the planets or whatever, the queer fish are the oddest, and so on. And so, and it's basically this dystopian society, as Lafferty sees it, that's kind of like a destructed, he calls it a destructed society that has sort of left off any sort of organization and construction and these sorts of things. And the queer fish are bad to this society because they keep trying to build stuff and construct stuff. And they're also called the ants of God for their building proclivities, it says. And it's quite a theological tale, and I think that's why I used to love it even more. But it is also, like, as I've mentioned before, his sort of buffalo punk type style, where it's like Western setting, Western American setting, but in the oddest, you know, sort of way that has some of that, you know, cyberpunk and now all these different, you know, myth punk and I don't know, everything, you know, those sort of qualities, sort of, in a way, to me, roughly speaking. Anyway, I think it's a really good story with some cool stuff. There's always like a devil or a demon somewhere, and this is like a junior demon that's tempting a young boy, and they get through the temptation, and the young boy's like, "You didn't do a very good job of that, did you?" He's like, "No, you know, I'm kind of young, you know." But anyway, but yeah, there's some cool stuff going on in there, and some of the theological stuff is quite beautiful, I think, actually. Even if some of it's a little over defensive, as I've said, Lafferty, I feel, gets sometimes. But there's also some real beauty in it and kind of a vision, a building vision that it kind of ends with. In a very cool bioregional setting. So I still stand by this story. I really like it a lot. Need to revisit it. But it's a personal fave. And I would put it nearly up there in the top tier stuff, but it's probably not going to be for everybody. Where's my discard pile? Bang. All right, so next we have A Special Condition in Summit City. As I've said, I had all these books in particular, these anthologies and stuff, in a certain place where water damage happened, so they're not looking too great, a lot of them. This is Terry Carr. He collected a lot of Lafferty. This one I don't remember very well, and I don't remember really loving, but it's kind of interesting, kind of a social satire sort of thing, as I recall. Symposium from 1973 was one of the first things I read by Lafferty, and I loved it, and I still love it. I was kind of looking through it. Such a great idea. Let's see if I can. It starts. Actually, it's got a little. He starts a lot of things with these little poems that are somewhat knowingly bad, but funny and fun. And this one's got quite a few. Usually, it's just like one sort of stanza. This has got quite a few, but I always remember there's this part I really like in it. Oh yeah, it's the very first bit. Perversity, cried ancient Swift, of lifeless things and cursed a skewer, but some of them with lilt and lift were fuller up with life than you are. I don't know, it's silly, but I like it. Anyway, but the actual story begins, the prose begins, the world begins, not necessarily for the first time. Not with a bang, but a tumble. In the beginning was noise, a cataract of worlds or entities rolling and cascading in fearful clatter. The cosmic atom, the world box, has disgorged. Here is bursting galactic expansion into free area, avalanche of noise and bright color. Not chaos, but thunderous exodus, and every particle bearing its own thunder sign. This is beginning. This is happening. Let no least part of it ever forget the primordial tumble that is the beginning. And what this then leads into is this is a box of children's ABC blocks that has been dumped out. That's the primordial Big Bang that is being described in the beginning. And they are AI children's blocks. They're artificial intelligences. You don't realize this right at first. I don't know if a lot of people would catch on to it, and maybe even I would catch on to it much more easily now, but the first time I didn't understand was it's just this conversation. It's a symposium between these characters that are named like YOU and ARE and stuff like that. And then slowly you realize it's the letters R, U, X, N, all these different things spelled that way. And they're having this conversation about cosmic beginnings and cosmic cycles and evolution and all these different things. And I think it's kind of hilarious and high concept. There's some cool stuff. He has these like throwaway lines. There's one of them is E-N is saying this thing about how every entity in the universe is the center of the universe and that kind of thing. And he says, oh, no, that's not the bit. He says, I stand and say that I am the medium of all things, that there are as many things smaller than me as there are larger. But the meanest parasite in a subatomic civilization may say the same thing, and so may the shambling oaf whose outline is made up of clustered galaxies. I mean, I don't know. I think it's quite lyrical, but there's humor in it at the same time, and cosmic sort of tall tale qualities to it, or mythical qualities. So I think that's a great blast. Can't believe it's never been collected anywhere. This is the kind of thing that could have been in does anyone else have something further to add? But instead they were reaching back and grabbing kind of lesser stories from the 60s and stuff. Strange, I don't know. Needs to be collected. Great story. I rate this quite highly. If there's a top tier and then like a lower edge of the top tier, then that's where this story goes, I think, for me. So in 1973 also, there's this pretty cool anthology based around ecology, I think, more or less. Yeah, no, it definitely is. And Lafferty has this really strange original story in here. Let me just double check it's the one I'm thinking of. Wait, should be. Long time ago, I put all the names of the stories on the cover. Yeah, Scorner's Seat, which is not an exciting title. Lafferty can have some really great titles. But man, it's cool and weird. And I remember the very first time I read it, I think I didn't even finish it because I was like, I don't really know what I'm reading. And I came back to it. And it's one of my favorites. It starts out with these people like in sewers picking, their job is to sort of pick glowing fungus, I think, and they're harvesting it. And it's this, it's an ecological tale. It's an overtly ecological tale, and it's very hard to see what Lafferty's saying. And he's talking about the goodness of like sewers and all this kind of thing. And there's like this, the Beowulf monster, Grendel, is in the sewers, and I think it eats somebody at some point. But it's a kind of little dystopian village, basically, where they're doing this. They're obsessed with recycling when I think from Lafferty's perspective they don't need to be. But I don't think it's like an anti-environmentalist story per se. I think it's more about certain philosophical mindsets and stuff. But it is in itself an ecological evocation that is kind of eco-monstrous, like I talk about in my PhD. And it's just weird and interesting, and I'm not really telling you all the weird and interesting things that happen in it. But yeah, so I rate that quite highly, and it's never been collected that I'm aware of. So we have another Galaxy one from 74, Endangered Species. I need to go back to this one. This is very strange. It's about sort of poltergeists or ghosts, or spirits or something. It's semi-horror, but speculative. Not sure. It definitely packs a punch in moments. It's got some really cool things, like people screaming in death and creating ghosts or something. But it's interesting. I need to revisit it. The Man with the Aura. I don't rate this one super highly, but it is good, and I think it's a little better than I think it is. But social satire sort of thing, again with a conceit of this man has this aura that's able to make everybody like him, even though he's bad. And Mad Undancing Bears in this crazy covered anthology, The Berserkers, which everybody was supposed to write about berserkers, and Lafferty has probably the most original take in it. With these like monks in the desert wearing bear skins coming to the cities. And it's basically, like I said before, as like the anti-hippie story, Ishmael into the Barrens. This is his anti-rock music story. He hated rock music. And there's this character, Dr. Rockter, in here, which is going to become my YouTube handle. And it's my Instagram account related to this channel that I haven't really passed around yet, but Dr. Rockter. Partly because I'm just kind of placing I love Lafferty, despite the fact that he wouldn't love like my music and these kinds of things. But the thing is, when Lafferty does things like his critiques of, as I've said before, like recreational drug use or rock music, it's just so cool. It's like the stuff he paints is just awesome. And there's a beautiful sort of scene with a biker, like a naked, hairy, fat biker fighting a fat, clothed monk, and they're like wrestling in the desert, and there's like a spiritual thing to it, and it's really cool. Then I think, and it's funny, a funny satire of all these people, what they did for rat rock and this rock, and it's like silly, but it kind of works. And then I think the dystopian factor toward the end, I think it's just too, Lafferty just is too caricaturing of his ideological enemies, as I've said many times. Not always, but he has these moments where he does that. And I think that's the case here, where the society wants people to just go around naked and make love to whoever wants to make love with them, and to like sacrifice a child in good faith, preferably your own. And and it's like, it's that like, yeah, it's not a great attitude toward like your fears of progressive society or something. And I think Lafferty has whether he would admit it or not, a lot of progressive values. But then he has, as I've said before, there's this like wrestling inside him between these poles of like conservative and liberal, which I find really interesting. But anyway, it's a pretty fun story. Not a top tier one, even as writing, I think. But I like it. So in 1975, there's this novella, From the Thunder Colt's Mouth, even though this anthology, In the Wake of Man, which has an awesome Gene Wolfe story. But if you're a Gene Wolfe fan, you'll have it in I think it's in The Island of Dr. Death and Other Stories. But Tracking Song, that might be in another, I can't remember if that's in that one or a different one. Awesome story. But From the Thunder Colt's Mouth is excerpted from the Argo mythos, and even when I finally read it in its context, it didn't quite click for me, but it has just some of the best, coolest stuff about the town's been partying the night before, and there's all these people and things like lying in the streets bleeding like confetti and stuff like that, and just all kinds of things going on that's really cool, but still just doesn't hold together as a whole story for me. So I don't massively rate it, but it has some of my favorite moments from Lafferty. So in 1975, okay, we've got Three Shadows of the Wolf. I wonder if this one has any artwork. Should have checked that. No, apparently not. Yeah, Three Shadows of the Wolf is an awesome R.A. Lafferty werewolf story. How cool, Lafferty writing werewolves, and it's Laffertian werewolves. It's like this really Oklahoma setting, and there's like, he always has like Irish Americans, French Americans, Italian Americans, Native Americans, kind of are often his cast. I can't remember if there's any Native Americans in this one, but French Americans are a big part of it. And it's like a mystery story, like a detective crime story almost, but with werewolves. And by the time, and it's kind of this like, is it a werewolf or isn't it? And there's like these descriptions that the people are just telling of werewolves transforming that are awesome, like transmogrifications, and hilarious, and then finally in the end, when it's revealed, yes, there is a werewolf. It's like numinous. It's numinous. It's like three entities somehow are like this werewolf, or maybe werewolves. I can't remember exactly. But like, not just like three different people, but like this unified 3-person entity or something. And it's, wow, it's really, really cool. And I saw in the archive the novel. He wrote a novel called Loup Garou, if that's how you pronounce that, but that, I think, a French term for werewolf. I've read a good portion of that, and I loved it. And here's the trade-off, basically, and I hope they will put that out separately. This needs to be collected in the short stories and stuff. It's awesome. And I like both the same, but they're totally different in that, obviously the novel's longer, and what it does with that length is it realizes its setting and characters much more, which is cool. So it's like another Oklahoma novel in that way. But it also is actually strictly a mystery story. It's a mystery novel, and he wrote a few of those. He really liked that, and that might have been a direction he'd taken if science fiction hadn't sold. And it's a good one, I think, from what I could tell. But it's very Chestertonian. It's like Father Brown or something, where the seemingly, or maybe even Sherlock Holmes, where the seemingly supernatural ends up having a natural explanation. But you still it retains all those people telling stories of how werewolves transform and stuff. So it's still got that cool kind of fantastical horror quality to it. And it's really, really good. So I love them both. Okay, so in 1975, we have Heart Grow Fonder, which is a social story about kind of swingers, people trading spouses, I think, but like with some meanness in there, people tricking each other, stealing each other's money or something. I don't know. I didn't totally love it at the time. I could imagine it growing on me and liking it better. But if you like stories about people doing mean things to each other, it's probably a good one. Assault on Fat Mountain. Now that's a cool name. Very short, little alternate history. it's full of these wonderful lists, bioregional lists that Lafferty makes that I love so much. And it just kind of imagines a redistribution of sort of wealth and political power in the states, I think particularly around the Appalachian states and how they're more in control of things or something. And that doesn't sound too exciting. And it's a very limited, just a little idea sketched out almost, but very well written and realized in that sense. And I really like it, but there's not a whole lot to it, but I just really love the way it's written more than anything probably. Now we come to one of my all-time favorites. This anthology has really taken a hit. This is Smo and the Implicit Clay from 1976. And I've got all these notes in here or whatever. Smo and the Implicit Clay. And this is an Institute for Impure Science story, though that doesn't become totally clear, I think, for a little while. Or no, maybe it's toward the beginning. You don't know right away. And it's very different, I think, in most ways than those stories, the ones that most of us are familiar with. And it's an interplanetary story, which I don't know if there's any others in that series that do that. But they go from Earth to this other planet. And I don't know how to explain it, but the editors obviously loved it and did a little intro to it. I'm trying to remember, is this Gardner? Yeah, Jack Dan and Gardner Dozois. And basically this planet is so it's a bioregional, it's a southwestern bioregional tale set on another planet in the sense, because the planet is seemingly uninhabited, but yet it is, because there are these people rising up from the ground and from the mud, and this guy's getting visions of billions, I think it says, of buffalo and Indians, is the term he used, which a lot of Native Americans use that term then, and some do now as well. Kind of rising up from the ground, which may sound like, trying to make Native Americans, sort of people, nature people or whatever. But he avoids that. If you look at his whole body of work, that's not what he's doing. And even in this one, when they're in a almost Blade Runner type flying car thing at one point back on Earth, and they notice that their taxi driver has these two braids down his back, and you realize it's this Native American, and that Lafferty's Native American characters, when they're not in a historical setting of some sort, tend to be what he knew, his working class sort of neighbors and stuff. So here's a cab driver. But anyway, and it's just this, it's Lafferty is not surreal. Somebody asked him once, do you consider your fiction surreal? He said, no, I don't. And of course, being Lafferty and being erudite, he's like, well, do you mean by the Surrealist Manifesto of 19 whatever? He's like, no. But he's like, my stuff is super real. And he kind of explains that, and it's really cool. So you might think of this as surreal, but it's definitely got a woozy sort of quality to it, but very funny. And it gets, I can't begin to explain it, but epic is in there and stuff. And the ending baffles me. I do not understand what he's doing in the ending. Also, it's told in this, it's the narration, the narrative structure is so experimental that it takes you a while. It's not as smooth as the other Institute for Impure Science stories. It's really well written with cool little stuff where there's a little cigar holder with a face. It's the whole Kilroy was here thing that World War II guys drew with the nose hanging over the wall or whatever. That's the theme. That's the Smo of the story. And there's a little metal one or something that's holding a cigar holder or something that starts making faces and stuff while they're talking and stuff. There's so many cool things in this story, and actually I think it says some profound things about colonialism and stuff, and how there is no empty barren land. There's always indigenous people already there, but set in space. Super cool story. So we have Fog in My Throat. Man, there is just some really, really strange fiction that Lafferty wrote that is lovely. Now, I've talked about some of Lafferty's stories being lovely before, and usually they're in a sort of gentler vein. of storytelling that's not as sort of pyrotechnic, as I call it, or what have you. This natural sunlight is really shining on me here. It'll go away. It's Glasgow. Anyway, so in the late 60s and in the 70s and in the 80s, Lafferty gets collected in a number of horror anthologies, which I really think says something about his fiction and about how the editors saw his fiction. I love this cover and this title, Super Horror. Super Horror! It's like 1976. This is Ramsey Campbell, so this will be pretty early. Him as an editor. How do you describe the story? It's been a while since I read it, but this is definitely one of my favorites. This one reminds me so much somehow of Stephen Graham Jones. And there's this particular story by Jones that is called Zombie Sharks with Metal Teeth, but it has almost nothing to do with zombie sharks with metal teeth until sort of vaguely right at the end. But this is Stephen Graham Jones, one of his short story collections. But it's like working in a lab with rodents and different stuff. And that's what this story is about. It's got a couple different things going on. There's like this killer that kind of intersects with this guy working in a lab or whatever. But he's working with these, now I've forgotten if they're gerbils or hamsters or what. They've been enhanced and they've become intelligent, but they don't just like talk in human speech, but they start they consider these humans their gods, and they start making these plays, these dramas and stuff about their gods and things. And it's beautiful. And there's human interaction, like sort of interrelationship as well involved. And it's very lovely and very strange and it's pretty dark, really. So I can see why I put it in a horror anthology. But here's what I want to say about that. I think that a lot of Lafferty's fiction, it's not realized enough, I think, or acknowledged enough that it fits in, or it doesn't really fit anywhere. It's always going to not quite fit these different categories, but there's overlap with weird fiction, just weird fiction, and the wideness of that definition as well. And maybe more and more I feel like it fits more with that sort of quote unquote new weird fiction or neo-horror, like some interesting things going on. Let me just show you real quick. People like Nathan Ballingrad, Nathan Ballingrad. Really great collection of stories. Michael Wayhunt, also great collection. And, sort of the big hitters like Mieville and Vandermeer. Vandermeer really likes Lafferty. That kind of stuff. There's some overlap there, especially in some of these stories that are collected in horror anthologies. So, yeah. And that whole strain of stuff pretty much is not collected anywhere. So it's like this unknown aspect to Lafferty, which needs to be known widely, and it should be collected. And some of these things easily could be in the very best of R.A. Lafferty. Easily, they count. They really are phenomenal. Fog in My Throat is top tier in my opinion. It's very well written and stuff. All right, so another horror anthology, 1976, from Kirby McCauley. Some of these I remember it's cool. It's cool to see his name by like people like Ramsey Campbell, but also like, is this the one with Stephen King in it? There's one where he's side by side with Stephen King in the late 70s. This isn't it, which is like really fun to see. But this one's called. There's a version of this with a way better cover. But Frights is the anthology, and this one is called "Oh Tell Me Will It Freeze Tonight," which is a very Lafferty type title, and it's a very bioregional, tall tale story. Does have these Native American characters that are really funny. Just that wry Native American humor, which I'll say more about that at some point. Let me see if I just have this book handy. I do not. There's a great collection. I do have it. Called Cherokee Stories of the Turtle Island Liars Club, put together by Christopher Tootin, who is Cherokee himself and a scholar, and he talks with these. It's a bunch of conversations with these Cherokee elders, but also through that becomes a new collection of Cherokee traditional tales, quote unquote, what used to be called myths and things, as well as contemporary stories. And these guys remind me so so much of Lafferty in general and of Lafferty's Native American characters. The way they talk, their worldview and everything. It's just, if you like Lafferty, I think you would love this book, and it's filled with these kinds of illustrations that are really great. I mean, this looks very Laffertian to me. So when I say Native Americans, I just want you to know I'm coming from a place of like Native American studies, and Lafferty was coming from a real life place about that and stuff. So it's not like a fetishizing of Native Americans or something, but there's some characters like that in the story and others, and it's really like rural, sort of pastoral almost, realizing they're off on a little hunting trip in the mountains, and they're telling each other these tall talk. I'll make that distinction at some point. There's the scholars talk about tall talk versus tall tales, and tall talk's just when you pepper in your conversation these whoppers, these like crazy things. But anyway, but there is this strong horror element with this like tree that's growing bloody fruit, and these storms that come, these sudden storms that come, that I guess they need to get swallowed up, and if they don't, this curse is going to come. This giant, basically a thunderbird, is going to come. He calls it a stormcock crow. Anyway, it does come. Let me see if I can reproduce this one moment where they're doing their tall talk, and he's talking about how big this bird is. He's like, it's so big, you just can't even imagine. And they're like, well, how big, and he goes like, holds his arms out like this, and they're like, that's not that big of a wingspan if you think about it. He said, who said anything about the wingspan? That's the space between its eyes, and this thing shows up right at the end. They're up in a skyscraper, so you got almost like a kaiju Godzilla sort of thing, and it comes in, it breaks through the window, and it bites one of them in half, and it sort of ends on this note of like reality melted away. It's just like, they're like, this is madness, so almost Lovecraftian. So it's really cool. And I rate that very, very highly. That's top tier for me. Thou Whited Wall, social dystopian. I think about like graffiti and news and stuff. And I wasn't totally grabbed by it. And again, I wasn't sure about some of the attitude. Another, here's the one where he's side by side with Stephen King in the table of contents. Charles Grant put out the Shadows series, and his story Splinters in here is not top tier, but really cool about like Lafferty's always doing like multiple, like a person having multiple selves and projections and different things, and that's kind of what this one's about. But also this kind of, again, sort of a screaming death sort of element and sort of things that does add a note of horror. I think it's interesting that they took it, that they were putting Lafferty, because they're still often funny and stuff, but they could, Lafferty has a horrific edge, and I've said before, he's in a horror comic mode, I think, and that's what I've argued before, and not horror comedy like the genre of movies, although it can have a bit of that feel, but it's just different than that. I call it horror comic. Anyway, so Chrysalis 3, Roy Torgerson did these, and he loves Lafferty, and he's one of the guys that talks about being addicted to Lafferty and needing more Laffertys and stuff, and he put as many as he could get, and he would do these cool intros to Lafferty, and got Lafferty to write a few words that say some cool stuff. This is one of my favorites. This is all this kind of stuff when I was still, I'd kind of stopped collecting. I felt like I had what there was, and I'd seen there were some of these others, and I was like, but I got them, and they were so good and so unusual, and still topped anything I'd seen by Lafferty. And I'm like, is there no end to the new type of thing he'll try? And there isn't. That's why I needed to get a hold of every one of them, because I never, and some underwhelmed me, but so many just blew me away. But this one has two stories: Bright Flightways and The Man Who Walked Through Cracks. And they are just mind-bending, really, in a certain mode. There's different ways Lafferty does mind-bending, but Bright Flightways, alternate history, it's just really well realized. It's really well written in a really contained story, I think, and very, again, bioregional, and basically like there's an automobile industry, but the combustible engine or whatever hasn't been invented, so they power it with like plant cells or something, which sounds cool and like the kind of thing we're trying to dream up now. But I don't know I think he was satirizing it for some reason. I'm not sure. But I don't know what he's doing with social commentary or whatever there, but it's a very cool story with just good writing and whatever. The Man Who Walked Through Cracks is a little more unruly of a story, unwieldy of a story, that yet goes to greater areas of weirdness and stuff, and it's just all about, it's like, again, like these college lectures and stuff about the space between musical notes and other sorts of interstices in existence, sort of ontological interstices, and stuff, which is really cool, sort of theoretical chat, mixed with, funny characters with funny names, and this really strange thing. Let me see if I can read this bit to you. Okay, so it says, "Ah, let us step into this crack here for a moment. It's roomy enough once you're in it, and the time passed there doesn't count. And be informed about the hemispheres. The two hemispheres were very old and of disputed origin, and they were prized possessions of the college. In form, each was a perfect sphere, and yet they were called hemispheres. It was said they had originally existed in the same spherical space, and that they had then been separated. They were of heavy glass, each at least a meter in diameter." Now here's where it gets good. "One of them was crammed with creatures, rats, rat-faced people, proper people. But their faces were bigger than their bodies, and the eyes were bigger than the faces. They seemed alive and avid to burst out. Most of the bodies and faces and eyes were cracked and shattered. You know that it was done by an eye-cracking sound. Broken like glass, and the pieces falling out of them. Yet they seemed alive and flexible, not rigid. They didn't seem at all miniaturized, but there were hundreds of them in that hemisphere. The other spherical hemisphere was all green meadows and game parks and cities and oceans, unoccupied, but waiting for visitation." Ah, out of the crack again. But be careful, don't mention that stuff. Those are some of those moments where I just really am like, I've never heard anybody describe, it's already, heads bigger than their bodies. Okay. Eyes bigger than their heads. What am I picturing? And then they're cracking and pieces are falling out, and it's like, he does a lot of that. And this is a tall tale thing where he, says the impossible almost. There's more impossible stuff than that. That really can't be pictured, but you accidentally went ahead and pictured it before you knew you couldn't picture it. And it's a really unsettling sort of thing that happens. Anyway, those are really, really great stories and need to be collected. I would call Man Who Walks Through Cracks definitely like Lafferty's like experimental fiction phase, just proper experimental fiction, and it goes with those late 80s novels, that kind of stuff. Quiz Ship Loose, that's a great title, from Chrysalis. Starts out with a bang. It's got Manbreaker Crag from 900 Grandmothers, and they go to this planet, and basically these kids are psychically projecting like this swamp full of monsters on them that are like biting them and eating them and stuff. And then that kind of stops, and they realize it's these kids doing it. And there's like this huge conversation about post-consciousness and whatever, and it's cool as a conversation, but doesn't totally work as a story. But I do like this story quite a bit. I like the beginning especially, and I think it kind of comes back to some of that monstery stuff. Good monster chat in there. Try to Remember is just this little old story that they put in here about, I've forgotten. I think it's a college professor and maybe his wife, and just it's a little maybe a twist sort of tale. It's good, but it's low fire. Another horror anthology, Whispers. I can't remember what this has in. I don't have my thing on the top, what this has in it. So, Lafferty, what did you contribute? Berry Hill, which is collected elsewhere. Little short horror story, pretty cool. Okay. This was only collected in 1980, but it's a story from 1970. Crocodile, about a kind of malevolent computer. and who's like a news editor, and it seems like one, but also like a computer or robot. It's really cool, but not like top tier. The Funny Face Murders, also in a horror anthology, again from Ramsey Campbell. And this is an Austro story, if you heard me talk about The Men Who Knew Everything and Austro and all that kind of thing. And this is one that's not collected in there. And it's almost just Austro and I think one of his tween or teen buddies. Yeah, Roy Mega, the electronics genius. And they come in on this like floating platform thing, but then it becomes this mystery about like these, is it masks that people wear, and then they're stabbing each other and there's these murders happening and stuff, and it's pretty, again, that kind of has that almost weird fiction quality to it. I really like it. It's a little rambly, but I really like that story a lot. This one has sort of like a planetary fantasy story almost. It's on a planet. The planet. The story is called the 47th Island. I think that's what the planet is called. And it's a really cool discourse about storytelling, about basically the metaphor of Plato's cave, and shadow storytelling and stuff, and about the need for like irrationality and tapping into the unconscious, and too much rationality is like cuts out too much of existence and that kind of thing. It has this really awesome trippy opening about multicolored intertwining snakes that's really good, and it's just all around definitely a good story. Maybe not top tier, but it's really good. Bank and Shoal of Time, this is really damaged. It's a time travel story, quite unlike the others, and gets into this one thing that Lafferty's on about, how rocks and other objects and abiota and stuff collect memories of time, so that if you had the right technology, you could pull out these layers of time and reconstruct almost in a virtual reality Sims sort of way the past, even the far past, and that kind of thing. It's really cool, and kind of an odd cast of characters and chat going on in there. Again, maybe not top tier, but I really like that story. Pretty cool. In Deepest Glass, top stuff. In Deepest Glass, I think its subtitle, see if I can find it real quick, is Short History of Neanderthals, maybe? Or no, of Stained Glass. In Deepest Glass, an informal history of stained glass windows. But it's about how the Neanderthals had stained glass and all this stuff, and how the visions of what is etched in the stained glass, and multiple stained glasses adding up to a bigger picture. Again, this is Lafferty's theme. And the vision of existence and life on Earth and stuff is really awesome and awe-inspiring. But also there's like a living quality to the stained glass, and it does weird things, and is like, they've tried to bury it because they don't want it anymore. Society doesn't, and they don't like what it shows, but it like is haunting them and coming back and stuff. This is a great little story. It is like a little history rather than like a story with characters and stuff. But I think it totally works. New People. Lafferty loves to do this thing like, okay, there's a mutational jump here. He was actually, I've noticed in his archive that he has some notes about Stephen Jay Gould's punctuated equilibrium idea about evolution taking like jumps sometimes, as I understand it. I'd like to read Gould at some point, but anyway, and he was into that. So he's always like these stories about, these are the new people, and this one's just titled New People, and it's okay. It's a special place in my heart. It's actually the first story I read by Lafferty, and I didn't pick him up at that time because I didn't know. Anyway, Great Tom Fool. Some people really like this. A computer, maybe a puzzle type story. I don't like it at all, really. It's just subpar epictistes to me, the computer from the Institute for Impure Science, but some people rate it. Pine Castle was one that I remember liking the writing, but I remember it didn't totally grab me. But like the editor of Wired, or one of the editors of Wired, who did a great article on Lafferty and spoke at one of the LAFCONs, and I'm blanking his name. I want to say Jason somebody, but sorry. We've had a little what do you call that? We've written each other. Anyway, so sorry, man. Really wonderful person, and he made me laugh so hard with his presentation. he really rates this story highly, so it really makes me want to revisit it because I really like his view of Lafferty. It's very fresh and exciting. I'll see if I can put his name in the comments. Flaming Arrow. Apparently, this is like an anthology where they work with Andre Norton's fantasy world or something, and Lafferty contributes to that. I don't know how it fits in with the rest because I don't think I'm ever going to make time to read the rest, but it's a cool little, like a meta fantasy story or something. I think there's a talking mouse at some point. Junkyard Thoughts. I don't know what to say about that. I don't exactly remember. I think there's a dog in that one, or is that Pine Castle? No, I'm pretty sure that's the dog who's thinking or something. I don't know. Inventions Bright and New, I love. Very strange, like the world just began or something, and there's powers, but they're like on a train shooting laser rifles at buffalo and other stuff. And it's very, very, some people, I haven't seen at least a few other fans be like, whoa, that story blew my mind. Because I do think it's the kind of thing you might pass over, like, because it's so sort of theoretical or whatever, but it's I think it's pretty wowing. And then we have Something Rich and Strange. Buck teeth help us contact aliens, and then our eyes start changing into like fly eyes. It's not the greatest, but it's got some cool stuff in it. Hands of the Man, little... Love the opening where it describes his hands a bunch, like almost like a landscape. So great. And then like one of Lafferty's little sort of group of con men sort of story, but interplanetary, but that's kind of almost in the background. And I think it connects to something else. I can't remember. I don't know if it's Institute for Impure Science or what. Pretty cool story. Not top tier. Rainy Day in Halicarnassus. I think these guys are in a boat and they go back in time and chat with Socrates. He's called Rocky or something. Don't really remember it. Pretty decent little speculative history type thing. Happening at Chosky Bottoms is like a twin companion tale to Boomer Flats, which I rate really highly. And this time it's a teen Bigfoot who joins a local high school football team. Like I could totally see this one being made a TV show. It's like, it's like Friday Night Lights with Bigfoot or something, because it's like family drama and stuff in there. But there's like a gruesome murder that they blame on the Bigfoot. But there's cool stuff about him going down into the mud and the swamps of his people and all this cool stuff. I do like that one quite a bit. Not sure if it's top tier. And lastly, The Emperor's Shoestrings. It was collected in like 97, so who knows when it was written. And again, like it's like I think this is probably the last thing I collected by him, and it's just indescribable and incomparable. Like nobody has ever done anything like this. It's just so strange. But basically, people are at some kind of convention, as is often the case in Lafferty, and there's these little people under their tables and little cubby holes into smaller places and some kind of birds and eggs and this whole discourse, and it's awesome. It's like high experimental fiction from Lafferty, like the late experimental novels, and really cool. Really, really like that one. It's very strange. So that's it. That's the uncollected Lafferty. And so we will go on and try to talk about some of the new collections and some other stuff in future videos. I just decided to go ahead and do this all in one. Hope you hung with me because I hope you heard about some of these really interesting stories. But let me know what you think. Let me know if you've read any of these. I'd love to hear from you and what you think if you've read these. All right, guys, take care. Thanks. Bye.